What we wanted to take you through today, so this is number 5 of the Forge's Ignite sessions for a little bit of respite in these challenging times. I guess sessions where we want to share hopefully some of our kind of experience, perspectives and points of view on some of the kind of common marketing challenges that we have been coming across. And today we'd like to share with you a particular challenge that's one that's all around language, and we've titled this session kind of Divided by a Common Language. And we describe it as being really all about the kind of risks of using what we also describe as, in the nicest possible way, fat words. And what do we mean by fat words? I guess what we mean is big words that every business has that tend to be things that businesses build their strategies around. That often tend to be words that kind of act as shorthands within a business. You know, we're a brand that's all about X, we're a brand that's all about Y, or our strategy for next year is all about X. All of the new products, you know, our new product strategy is all about delivering Y. Here's just a selection of those kind of big fat words that we're talking about, some of them that we've come across. Things like natural, you know, we're a brand that's all about natural, we're a brand that's all about health. You know, our strategy is about permissibility, our strategy is about convenience, our strategy is about freshness. For us, these are words that can be, they're so big, they're so fat that they can be, I guess, ambiguous. And when a business isn't absolutely crystal clear about how it defines those concepts, then it can really create some significant confusion. What do we mean by confusion? We mean a brand that can be misunderstood by consumers. So if you're not clear, for example, what version of natural your brand is all about, then you can deliver multiple versions of natural, multiple interpretations of that big, broad concept area, and end up with a brand that, rather than being sharp and pointed and clear and having, I guess, stand out for consumers, you can end up with a brand that, as we say, is fuzzy and misunderstood. You can end up with the kind of R&D teams, the kind of product or strategy development teams behind the kind of front line of your business, developing ideas, developing IP that doesn't really actually fit your strategy. Because again, they might have a different interpretation around this big fat word that's in the heart of your business. You can end up with a confused brand architecture. So by mixing versions of this particular territory, for example, as I said, natural, you can end up with a brand architecture that doesn't necessarily make sense. You can end up not knowing, for example, which version of this thing natural consumers value more, and ultimately therefore ending up with a kind of confusion in terms of the pricing of the different variants that you might offer within your proposition. You can also end up with communications that feel much too general and that ultimately don't truly connect with consumers. What we tend to find, and we'll show in a bit more detail, is that when you have these big fat words, you have different interpretations, different expressions that sit under them, and different consumer groups that align with each of those expressions. So ultimately, if you're communicating at a higher level, at a more general level, you end up kind of almost connecting with nobody rather than connecting with everybody. And finally, you can end up with definitions that just don't align with how people really see the reality of the world. One thing we would say, sorry, just jump forward, is it's really important that when we're dealing with these fat words, that static definitions are just not helpful. So this is not about opening the dictionary and saying, okay, what does the dictionary tell us that really is the definition of freshness? You know, freshness is a feeling that, etc., etc., etc. That's not helpful, because that just stays at that higher level. It stays in that big, broad territory. What you actually need to do is ladder down rather than ladder up. And just to give you an expression of that, for one of our clients, we've looked at this territory of freshness, and we were looking at it in the context of personal care, looking at it across, in fact, a range of different categories within personal care. And you can imagine that a business could say, oh, the most important thing in the world of personal care, whether you're talking about toothpaste, whether you're talking about deodorant, whether you're talking about washing and bathing, the most important benefit for consumers is freshness. And ultimately that's true, but it's so big and broad that it ends up being sort of meaningless rather than meaningful. Of course it's about freshness, but it's just the core of the category. To make that meaningful, you have to drop your definition down to the next level. We uncovered a host of different sub-expressions, if you like, that were meaningful. So here's just 4 of them. I think thinking back, we had at least 13 of them. They were all interpretations of freshness. So freshness could be about boosting and really kind of delivering that sense of freshness. Freshness could be much more intense. It could be about shocking. Freshness could be much more subtle. It could be about renewing and bringing a kind of fresh perspective in that way. Freshness could be, again, more sensorial and more about something like radiating. So rather than, again, as intense as something like boosting and shocking, something that was more subtle and a more kind of gentle action of freshness. So we really found that kind of breaking down this big concept into these different meaningful expressions was much more helpful for the business. And then it enabled the business to kind of look at each of these interpretations and understand which of them were relevant for their different subcategories. So if you were really focused on skincare, what was most meaningful? If you were really focused on deodorizing, what was most meaningful? And indeed, which were the groups of consumers who most aligned themselves with these different sub-expressions, with these different interpretations. Here we have just one example, so this idea of boosting, but how it can come to life across a kind of variety of different categories. So, everything from kind of laundry to kind of vitamins to kind of, drinks and kind of boosting drinks, things like Actimel, probiotics, things like Red Bull, and things like skincare, so kind of collagen boosting, for example. So just an example of, the myriad kind of categories that this is relevant to, but this is just, as I say, one single expression of the idea of freshness. And we could then kind of work with this expression, talk through with consumers, talk through different categories and understand where it really had most relevance and traction. I guess across our kind of exploration of this idea of fat words, we've kind of identified 2 or 3 kind of key themes and 2 or 3 key, I guess, benefits and reasons why it really pays to unpack those kind of fat words and really pays to ensure that you have that clarity, to ensure that you've, I guess, removed that vagueness from your business. The first of those is it can help you really create and implement clear brand strategies. Be really clear about the interpretation of your concept. Here we have an example that's health, something that, we hear so many brands talk about in marketing, so many brands saying, this is the direction they want to move their brand in, or this is the direction they're interested in unlocking for consumers. We know that consumers are ever more interested in this space, but health can mean very different things. Health can mean taking the bad stuff out. So, here we have the example of Halo Top ice cream, talking about removing the fat, removing the calories, keeping all the taste, but removing the bad stuff. We have examples that are about kind of good stuff in. So here's an example that's a brand called True, a relatively new brand here in the UK, that's all about boosting fiber. So that's about delivering kind of higher fiber. So rather than about what it's taken out, this is a brand that's really about what it's put in, what it's delivering to kind of give you that boost. But also there are absolutely, brand new paradigms in the world of health. So just as one example, we have the brand Beyond Meat. They're plant-based products, which again, for some consumers are all about health. For other consumers, there's other messages in there. They can be about kind of sustainability. They can be about kind of environmental responsibility. They can be about kind of, responsibility towards animals. But certainly there's an interpretation of those brands and the success of that brand that's about health. And that's, again, a very different kind of interpretation. It's not necessarily about bad stuff out or good stuff in, but it's about a completely new way of looking at health. The second territory we want to talk about, second big benefit, is being able to take advantage of those different sub-expressions of a particular umbrella concept. And this is really all about maximizing the opportunity for differentiation. So here we've got an example that's about skincare. And care is something that, again, is one of those big fat words. It just sits at the center of this category of skincare, as the name suggests. But it's just a category generic. In and of itself, it doesn't really mean very much to consumers. And there are different expressions of how you might bring that to life and different ways in which brands can then differentiate themselves in what is I guess, extremely busy category. So just three examples here. We have a brand called Skin Inc. That's all about kind of personalization. So a proprietary diagnostic tool that's based on decades and decades of research that helps each individual consumer evaluate their skin and then select the most appropriate solutions. So it's a version of skincare, but it's a version that's all about personalization. It's all about matching to the individual. In the middle, we have the, very familiar territory of age management. So, L'Oreal, a huge brand, and again, a really interesting brand in this context, because it's a brand that effectively has a portfolio of brands, a portfolio of individual propositions that sit underneath that kind of, that umbrella brand. But it needs to therefore be really specific about pulling out the distinct benefits. So Age Perfect, clearly as the name suggests, is focusing really forensically, really kind of laser-like precision on this idea of age management. And it's designed to tackle those very specific issues that your skin has at different stages of your life as it gradually ages. And the third example here, third interpretation of what care could mean, is a territory that's all about intelligence and intelligent solutions. So a brand here, Illusion, that has what they claim to be adaptive skincare. That creates, I guess, what they call an ecosystem of active ingredients that allow the skin, I guess, to draw down and to take out from the product exactly what it needs. So again, a sense of kind of personalization, but rather than being delivered through diagnostics, it's delivered through a product that's intelligent, that can kind of interact with your skin, your unique ecosystem, and adapt accordingly. So what we see there is three very different interpretations, three very different expressions of this broader world of care, and that different brands have, I guess, honed in on the specific expression that they can use to create differentiation and meaning and to align with a particular set of consumers. The third big benefit we got that we want to talk about is evolving the meaning of a pillar as it evolves for consumers. So really staying in tune with consumers and what the true meaning of a concept and an expression is for consumers. And a very simple expression, a simple example here, is McDonald's. So McDonald's kind of, I guess the original fast food brand in many ways. And it has evolved that expression of speed, that expression of convenience, if you like, through its lifetime. So, starting off with just the speed of service, going through things like, being open 24 hours a day, going through things like kind of drive-through as an expression of convenience, then moving on to this kind of territory of control. So, no longer about the speed with which someone can deal with your kind of order, but actually almost removing people from the process, allowing you to have, total control over what you're doing through the, I guess, installation of these terminals. And ultimately where we are, I guess, more recently, is them teaming up with Uber Eats to deliver, I guess, a new expression of convenience, something where consumers are saying, I don't even want to leave home. I don't even want to come to you to experience your proposition. I want you to bring it to me. So a brand like McDonald's that's constantly, I guess, staying in tune, constantly listening to the way its core concept is changing and evolving with consumers, means that it can keep evolving its own proposition and offer to better deliver. And just one quick example I just want to share with you in the last minute or so of the session. We explored for a particular brand, Pernod, who have a whole range of kind of whiskey brands, and we were looking at the world of whiskey here. And so particularly exploring the idea of Scottishness. And what we found that was really interesting is that, effectively the vast majority of brands were working in an incredibly tight space, in an incredibly stereotypical space, where Scotland was effectively just the world of kilts and castles and beautiful countryside. And what we did was spend a lot of time talking to Scottish consumers, to Scottish students, talking to a range of kind of experts in Scotland to really pull apart the potential meanings of Scotland. And we just have a few examples on this page, but those kind of meanings kind of stretched from, I guess, things that were much more to do with the ecosystem, the environment, the landscape, things that were much more to do with the people. So qualities like being inventive, or much more kind of personality kind of characteristics, like being warm and funny and cheeky, but also through to, I guess, concepts of kind of being brave, being progressive, being a country that's incredibly inclusive. So what we ended up pulling apart was a much more nuanced, a much more varied picture of what Scotland could mean. And that enabled us to then take that to different countries, to apply that to different brands, to enable them to pull out this nuance, to enable them to gain this sense of differentiation. So just one quick example. And just to summarize very quickly, you know, this session was all about really don't allow your business, if you can, to be divided by a common language, that it often pays not to ladder up to the big definition of these territories, but to ladder down to the detail, to the sub-expressions, to the different nuances that sit underneath it. And that sense of precision, that kind of benefit of being more precise, can enable you to be more focused in your strategy, more effective in how you manage your portfolio of brands, and ultimately help you evolve as your consumers evolve. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I hope you found that interesting and thought-provoking. And we'd love to hear your perspectives and experience if anybody would like to share.